So if I asked you, what is psychology, you'd probably have an answer ready to go. The study of the mind, right? Simple. But it turns out that simple question has a surprisingly complicated answer, one that kind of splits the whole field right down the middle.
Because that's really the tension at the heart of it all. Is psychology a hard science? A collection of facts and theories you can prove? Or is it something more, I don't know, more like an art? A practice that's built on values and ethics? That's the big question we're going to dig into.
So let's start with the basics, right? The version most of us learn first. The clean, simple, textbook definition you'd cram for a big exam. If you were to say, pick up a study guide for the National Medical Admission Test, the NMAT, it would tell you something really clear. Psychology is the study of behavior and mental processes, how we think, act, and interact. It's all presented as very straightforward, very factual, very scientific.
And the scientific, kind of clockwork view of the mind, it applies even to the most famous theories out there. I mean, take Freud's psychoanalysis. The idea is that our behavior is driven by this whole unconscious mind, which is powered by a life force, or libido. It's a pretty wild idea, but it's presented like a fundamental model of how the mind works.
And I love this comic because it shows exactly how we simplify these huge concepts. We learn about these things called defense mechanisms, like rationalization or displacement, which is basically, when you get mad at your boss, so you go home and kick the wall. They become these neat little categories to explain our really, really messy human behavior.
And there's a ton of pressure to just learn these categories as cold, hard facts. For a lot of people, psychology isn't some abstract field of deep thought. It's a list of right answers you need to know for a test that could shape your whole future. Just look at this post from a Reddit user, a psych major getting ready for their medical school exams. Their advice? For the psychology section, the key was breadth over depth. It wasn't about deep understanding. Nope. It was about knowing a little bit about a lot of concepts. Psychology as a game of high-stakes trivia.
Okay, but what if that neat scientific foundation has some serious cracks in it? What if viewing psychology purely as a science of facts misses the most important parts of what it means to be human?
All right, so let's completely switch gears and look at this from another angle. This comes from a psychologist and philosopher named Henrik Berg. He argues that when we try way too hard to make psychology a pure science, we can actually end up with a pretty warped picture of ourselves. Now, to be clear, Berg isn't anti-science, not at all. He totally gets that science gives us simplified models to help us understand a super complex world. And that's incredibly useful, right? Theories help us get a handle on things.
But, and this is the big but, what happens when our own deeply held beliefs, stuff we don't even notice, create these massive blind spots? What happens when our so-called science is just reflecting our own biases back at us? This is a really chilling example. In the 1850s, an American physician diagnosed a mental illness called drapetomania. The main symptom? An enslaved person's desire to flee captivity. To us today, that sounds absurd and just morally bankrupt. But at the time, it was presented as science. It's a humbling, powerful reminder that science can be warped by the values of its time. So with that tough lesson from history in mind, let's turn that same critical eye to how we think about mental health and therapy today. Berg warns about this danger he calls medicalization. It's the risk of turning way too much of normal human life into a medical problem. The intention is good, of course, to reduce suffering. But the paradox is that by labeling every difficulty a disorder, we might just be creating more anxiety, a bigger fear of being sick. And you can really see this tension play out in different kinds of therapy. On one side, you have cognitive behavioral therapy, which often sees mental illness as a problem to be fixed, a deviation to be corrected. It focuses on symptoms. On the other side, you have something like existential therapy. It's all about meaning. And it sees suffering not as a bug, but as a feature, an unavoidable part of life that we have to confront. These aren't just different techniques. They're fundamentally different philosophies about what it means to be alive. And here's the kicker. Even the most official, mainstream psychology admits it isn't just about facts. The American Psychological Association's own code of conduct is built on ethical principles, values, things like justice, integrity, and respect for people's dignity. This is a clear admission, right there in black and white, that psychology is more than just science. So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with a field that has two very distinct and, sometimes conflicting faces. It's both a science and an art. And that, right there, is the core takeaway.
Psychology's greatest challenge, and maybe its greatest strength, is that it has to be both. It needs the rigor of science, absolutely, but it also needs the wisdom and humanity of art. It relies on facts, but it's ultimately guided by values. As one writer, Alan Giltfate, put it, psychotherapy is shaped by values that are often so deeply embedded in our culture that we don't even notice them. He calls them theoretical ghosts. They're in the room, guiding the conversation, but no one ever acknowledges they're there.
And so we end right back where we started, but with a much deeper question. When we try to understand the human mind, what are we really searching for? Is it a neat scientific fact that can be memorized for a test? Or is it a messy, complicated, and deeply human ethical truth? The real answer, it seems, is that you can't have one without the other.